Purple Heart from when I was wounded in Iraq.
Sergeant First Class Richard Stayskell still has the sniper's bullet
Good souvenir for me to remember.
that pierced his lung in 2004, nearly killing him.
A reminder of how fragile life is. Something could change everything just in an instant.
Hey girls, guess what? We're gonna stay here till Friday.
Last year, at age 36, breathing became difficult for the Green Beret from North Carolina.
I felt like I was drowning.
Doctors at Fort Bragg ran tests, taking this CAT scan in January 2017, then sent him home.
They said my physical was fine.
But his symptoms got worse. 4 months later, he was rushed to Womack Army Medical Center, barely conscious, according to his wife.
They had to crack down on his chest to get him to pop his eyes open.
Medical records indicate the military's doctors took another look at his CAT scan, this time noting an abnormality that needed attention, a possible mass in the middle of his chest. A transbronchial biopsy was advised, but Stayskell and his wife say they weren't told any of that. Instead, doctors said he had pneumonia.
They checked my heart, said everything was fine.
Then he began coughing up blood. He tried to make an appointment to see a pulmonologist on base, but was told he'd have to wait at least a month.
I said, hey, something's not right. I need to be looked at. Somebody needs to take me seriously. Somebody needs to help me. And I just kept getting told, sir, new patients are not a priority.
Last June, he was approved to see a civilian doctor, and a new scan was taken.
Did a biopsy. When I woke up, my wife was crying, and he was telling her that I had cancer.
Stage 4 terminal cancer. His tumor has metastasized, spreading to other organs.
I feel great because I don't want to believe that it's there. If it's false hope, it's still hope. But there's days I just really try not to believe that I have it. And some days I'm good at convincing myself. So, that's pretty much how I go about my days.
Do you think this should have been detected earlier?
Absolutely.
He's hired attorney Natalie Kawam, who's pursuing a $10 million lawsuit against the government. What do you think would have happened if they had detected this months earlier?
We don't have a man who's dying.
The law firm hired board-certified radiologist Dr. Louis Laskowski to review Stayskell's CAT scans.
If I were testifying in court, I would consider this a case of gross malpractice.
Dr. Laskowski says the military's doctors should have detected his cancer in January 2017, 6 months before a civilian doctor did. That mistake, he says, allowed the aggressive tumor to go untreated and double in size.
I cannot fathom an experienced radiologist missing this case.
But the case is unlikely to make it to trial. That's because under a 1950 Supreme Court decision called the Ferris Doctrine, active duty military are prevented from suing the government for injuries incidental to military service. If Stayskell was a civilian, he would have had the right to sue for medical malpractice. Because he was active duty, he can't. Department of Defense officials refused to comment on Stayskell's case. We asked if anyone had sympathy for what he and his family are going through. But Pentagon officials wouldn't even offer that, instead sending Fox 46 this statement saying, reversal of the Ferris Doctrine would destroy the premise of the no-fault compensation system currently applicable to all workers' compensation programs. But Kawam says this isn't about workers' compensation, pointing out Stayskell took a bullet and never complained. For them, this is about medical malpractice. For Stayskell and his family, it's now about their daughters growing up without a father.
What motivates you to keep going?
I try to set examples for my kids of, you got to do the right thing. You got to fix the things that are broken. If you don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Stayskell tells me he has at least a year to live. Now, I reached out to Fort Bragg and Womack Army Medical Center. Both declined to comment. Tomorrow night at 10, a congressman from Concord is looking into changing federal law because of our investigation. In the newsroom, Matt Grant, Fox 46 Charlotte.
Well, Fox 46 investigation into the medical malpractice of a North Carolina military soldier is making people angry enough to change a law.
Well, the soldier has cancer and has nearly a year left to live. Fox 46 investigator Matt Grant spoke to a lawmaker who wants to get results.
This is my Purple Heart from when I was wounded in Iraq.
Sergeant First Class Richard Stayskell fought for our country. Now he's fighting for his life.
I pretty much was told to take one day at a time.
Today, Stayskell is cherishing the time he has left with his 2 young daughters. The 37-year-old Green Beret from North Carolina has stage 4 terminal lung cancer.
I feel great because I don't want to believe that it's there. If it's false hope, it's still hope. But there's days I just really try not to believe that I have it. And some days I'm good at convincing myself. So, that's pretty much how I go about my days.
Last year, doctors at Womack Army Medical Center failed to diagnose his cancer, which was detected by a civilian doctor 6 months later. That delay in treatment allowed the aggressive tumor time to grow and spread.
If I were testifying in court, I would consider this a case of gross malpractice.
But Stejskal can't sue the doctors who missed his cancer because of a 1950 Supreme Court decision called the Ferris Doctrine, which bars active duty military from suing the government for medical malpractice, something he could do if he was a civilian. But because he's active duty, he can't.
What a heartbreaking story. You know, here's a real American hero who put his life on the line for this country. And to see what he's going through now is tough.
Republican Congressman Richard Hudson of Concord met with Stejskal.
It violates a sense of right and wrong.
And wants to change federal law.
I'm taking a look at the Ferris Doctrine and whether or not we think it's fairly applied.
Hudson is now considering legislation that would give soldiers the ability to sue the government under certain conditions.
My internal sense of fairness tells me there ought to be some limited pathway for folks like Rich who can pursue this.
So you think something needs to change?
I think so.
Natalie Kawam thinks so too.
We need to protect our soldiers like they protect us.
The Florida attorney is now representing Stejskal, and despite the Ferris Doctrine, is pursuing a $10 million lawsuit against the government for medical malpractice. What do you think would have happened if they had detected this months earlier?
We don't have a man who's dying.
Fox 46 wants to know if the doctors and radiologists who missed Stejskal's cancer are still employed, if his case was ever investigated, and if any changes were made to prevent this from happening again. But all we got was the runaround. The Department of Defense would only say it supports the Ferris Doctrine. Fort Bragg referred us to Womack, which referred us to Army Claims, which referred us to Army Medical Command, which told us they can't comment on pending litigation, and referred us back to the Department of Defense.
I try to set examples for my kids of, you got to do the right thing. You got to fix the things that are broken. If you don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Well, Stejskal, his family, and his attorney all plan to go to Capitol Hill in the coming weeks to meet directly with other lawmakers. He hopes his story can spark change.
To me, in my opinion, telling me you were less than everybody else.
This North Carolina Purple Heart Green Beret is putting up one last fight.
Soldiers are being wronged.
Sergeant First Class Richard Stejskal has stage 4 terminal lung cancer. Cancer his attorney says Womack Army Medical Center should have detected in this 2017 CAT scan, but didn't, causing a 6-month delay in treatment, which allowed his tumor to double in size and spread.
He says, things happen. I don't know what to tell you, and I'm not sure what to do. Things happen? Yes, ma'am.
In between radiation treatment, the Special Forces soldier is traveling to Capitol Hill. He's pushing for a law that would allow active duty soldiers the right to sue the government for medical malpractice, something he's prevented from doing under a 1950 Supreme Court decision called the Ferris Doctrine. If Stejskal was a civilian, he could sue, but because he's active duty, he can't.
Should our service members be having the most incompetent physician provide them health care? I think most Americans would say absolutely not.
Right.
We were there when Stejskal and his attorneys met with Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speer of California, a ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee.
I'm not asking for special treatment.
No, you're not.
I'm asking for fair, equal rights.
You're just asking for justice. This will be one of the first hearings we have.
The Congresswoman later telling us a hearing could happen as early as next year.
I think he made a very compelling case for Congress to review the Ferris Doctrine. I look forward to an opportunity to have him come back and testify before Congress.
The push to overhaul the Ferris Doctrine has failed in the past, but because of Stejskal, is now gaining bipartisan support.
I think we'll get it done, but I think it's going to take some time.
Republican Representative Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma also met with Stejskal and is now pushing for change.
Well, it's something we are looking into. We're trying to figure out the best path forward.
So many other things that I'd love to be doing right now.
Stejskal says he's been given at least a year to live. He's sacrificing time he could be spending with his young daughters to once again fight for a cause bigger than himself.
It's always worth the effort. There's nothing that's not worth the effort if you believe in it.
Sergeant First Class Stejskal, his wife, and his attorney all agree this is going to be an uphill battle.
As Fox 46 investigator Matt Grant uncovered, when something goes wrong, our soldiers are often left to fight for themselves.
I volunteered to be in the military. I didn't volunteer to be attacked and almost murdered in my office.
Army Captain Katie Blanchard still carries the scars, emotional and physical, from the day she was almost murdered.
I knew that he was going to try to kill me. I knew that this was
3 years ago, Blanchard was doused in gasoline, set on fire, and repeatedly stabbed at her job at the Munson Army Health Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Her attacker, a coworker with a history of behavior problems.
I didn't think I was going to make it.
18% of her body was burned.
The pain was so bad that I would just try not to breathe or move.
She spent more than 2.5 months in the hospital and says she endured hundreds of surgeries.
I just started screaming, you knew this was going to happen.
An internal investigation found Blanchard told officials she thought something bad was going to happen to her a month before her attack, warning he, quote, may hurt her.
I went to them and said, this man is going to kill me. The supervisor at the time looked at me with tears in my eyes and said, come to me with facts, not emotions.
The Army's report blamed leadership for failing to take action and allowing unsafe conditions in the workplace. Despite that indictment, a Fox 46 investigation found Blanchard, like many other active duty soldiers, are unable to sue the government because of a 1950 Supreme Court decision called the Ferris Doctrine. That grants the government immunity for injuries incident to military service.
This Ferris Doctrine is being misapplied and overly broadly applied to cases that have nothing to do with service-related or combat-related injuries.
Her attacker was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay $3.5 million restitution. Blanchard says she's received less than $20,000 of that. This week she met with lawmakers to support a new bill that would overturn the Ferris Doctrine, giving her the ability to recoup the money she would have earned if she wasn't forced to retire at 28 years old. She's now dedicating her life to the prevention of workplace violence. In Washington, Matt Grant, Fox 46 Charlotte.
And that is why Matt Grant is working so hard to get results. We reached out to Munson Medical Center, but officials there had no comment.
46 investigation is getting results for an ailing soldier on Capitol Hill.
Fox 46's Matt Grant traveled to Washington, D.C., where congressional leaders heard testimony on the Ferris Doctrine. Here's his report.
Sir, this is inexcusable.
Fighting back tears, Sergeant First Class Richard Stayskull told lawmakers that troops fighting for our country are stripped of their rights when medical care goes wrong.
The hardest thing I have to do is explain to my children when they ask me, this doesn't make sense, how is this happening? And I have no good answer to give them.
In 2017, doctors at Womack Army Medical Center misdiagnosed his lung cancer as pneumonia. As a result, his cancer spread and is now stage 4 terminal. His family wanted to sue for malpractice, but because of a 1950 Supreme Court decision called the Ferris Doctrine, they can't. The ruling prevents active duty military from suing the government.
The doctrine has been utilized by branches of military to shield negligent medical care given by military providers.
The hearing on Capitol Hill is aimed at changing that. Democratic Representative Jackie Speer of California filed a new bill named for Stayskull. That would give active duty soldiers the right to sue, a right they'd have if they were civilian or retired.
I'm very confident that we're going to be able to move this bill. How swiftly, I can't say.
Stayskull and his attorney both crediting Fox 46 for getting results.
This is exactly what we wished for, and here we are today, thanks to you.
Fox 46, I can't thank enough for just taking the time to hear us out, and to share our story. It's honorable that our Congress is listening and hearing our voices, and that they're willing to make changes.
Opponents of the Ferris Doctrine point out that even prisoners have the ability to sue when their doctor makes a mistake, but those in uniform can't. We'll continue to monitor the progress of this bill. In Washington, Matt Grant, Fox 46 Charlotte.